and welcome to Stay for Dinner, a podcast of cooking, curiosity, and conversation. If you love cooking, hate cooking, have no idea how you even feel about cooking because you've never tried it before, congratulations, you are in the right place. The place at the moment is my small apartment kitchen in Los Angeles. I am DC Pierson. I am a comedian, author, an enthusiastic home cook, and today my guest is Mary Sasson, comedian, improviser here in Los Angeles, super funny, great person who I always really like talking to and really liked talking to for the show. Before we can get into my conversation with Mary, I am making a meal, and that meal is a real meal that Haley, my wife, and I are actually going to be eating for dinner, and as always, I have put myself in a situation where I need to do it soon because it's food that we actually have to eat. So let's get into it, shall we? I am making, again, from the New York Times cooking section. I say that like it's a physical part of a physical newspaper. It's not. It's an app on my phone. Making fusilli with broccoli and anchovies. I had seen another recipe online called like melted broccoli and anchovy and capers, something or other that sounded really good. Then when I was reading the comments, they were not that enthused about the recipe, and there was just like a bunch of steps, and people were like, this is a lot of steps for a simple pasta dish, and I ended up finding this recipe that is similar. It seems like you find, I would love to know what the underlying like dish or thing is called, but a lot of recipes involving broccoli and anchovies. I really like, it's funny, I'm realizing, saying it out loud now, that these are two things that kids in movies and probably in real life hate. And this is them combined. And in this case, I'm also making it with a like whole wheat pasta. So really just like the kids, there's nowhere to hide here, but that's okay. No kids have to eat this. It's just us, and we're extremely mature. So let's get into it. A quick check of my ingredients. I need to have all these amounts in my head because this is 4 to 6 servings and we're going to be making 2 to 3 servings. So half of a generous bunch of broccoli, salt and black pepper, half a pound of fusilli pasta. I have a whole wheat or grain, or maybe just organic, hard red winter wheat, full flavor. Pipe regate. That is very fancy. And on the side it says verifiable true whole wheat. All of these things look like this package is styled like it's some sort of denim product that's trying to convince you of its like old school integrity, that like actual people who built a barn wore it. But in this case, it's pasta. So that's good. That makes me feel good about it. Again, half a pound of fusilli. Like I said, we have pipe regate. 1.5 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. It says, I guess by halves, I would be using 1 garlic clove. So I'm going to be using 4 garlic cloves minced, 2 to 3 anchovy fillets, or to taste, I might go like 3 or maybe even 4, because like I said, we really like them, and I'm worried about, one of the complaints about the other recipes that was in this style was that it ultimately wasn't super flavorful by the end, so I just want to make sure that it's still flavorful. By the amounts that I would be dividing, this would call for 1/4 teaspoon of red pepper flakes. I'm going to use more than that. I might use the original 1/2 teaspoon of red pepper flakes that was called for a larger amount of this dish, or maybe even more so. Because again, want it to have flavor, really like the spice, totally cool with that. Freshly grated Parmesan or Pecorino for serving. That's it. So let's get into my prep steps. First, I'm going to be bringing a large pot of water to a rolling boil. In my case, it's a medium pot of water. It's asking us to salt it generously. I already salted it before, a minute ago, but just a little more for luck. Then it asks us to cut the broccoli crowns from the stems, leaving about 1 inch of stem at the base of each crown and setting aside the thick stems for another purpose. So I think what that means is that we are cutting, is the crown the entire thing, or is it just the individual? I guess these would be the florets, right? Because you hear about florets. So the crown would be like the whole piece of broccoli. In the original full amount recipe, 1 3/4 pounds of broccoli, I have about what I think is describing as 2 crowns. And secretly, I already did the part where I cut the very thick stems off, and I've left just a little bit of stem on so it's holding the florets together, right? These are the florets. Okay, I just looked it up to confirm. I was right. The broccoli crown is the big thing of broccoli with all the different little sort of trees coming off of it. As described in the first Google result for broccoli crowns, which I guess is the Walmart website, broccoli crowns are the premium cut of broccoli trimmed just underneath the broccoli head. So I think that's exactly what I just made. I just made broccoli crowns by cutting off a big part of the stem, just enough on there to hold the florets together. The word floret to me sounds like it would be involved in Machiavelli's The Prince. Don't know why, it just does. And then quickly doing my other little prep steps that are hidden in the ingredients list, like mincing the garlic. Then I'm going to rinse my anchovy fillets. Again, for this amount of pasta, this recipe is calling for like 2 to 2.5, 3. I might honestly do 4, just because they don't really taste fishy is the thing about anchovies once you're, mincing them up and cooking them in a dish, and just really want that flavor, that like salt, that umami that comes with the anchovy. So ultimately I have 1, 2, I just put a fork in the jar and tried to, there we go, that's 4. Doing it. Rinse them off and chopping them. Okay, not a mince, just a chop. My only other prep step I haven't done is grating the Parmesan and measuring out the red pepper flakes. The red pepper flakes I'm just going to do by eye, and grating the Parmesan is a little risky to do it too far in advance around here because we have cats who love nothing more than to run a like grated Parmesan heist at the cutting board when your back is turned. So I'm going to hold off and do it a la minute, as they say. And my water hasn't quite come to a boil yet, so while I wait, I'm going to get a bowl of cold water going, because I'm going to need that for a later step. That's where the broccoli is going to land after I cook it. All right, and the water is, as you can maybe hear as I lean over the pot, onto a rolling boil. So I'm going to toss gently in the broccoli crowns. Okay, now I understand why a large pot was called for. That was a rookie mistake. For some reason I was like, I'm doing less, so I only need a medium pot. So now they are not entirely submerged. But it was really cool. When they hit the water, they immediately turned bright, bright green. It was pretty cool. So I'm gonna let them get back up to temp here, and then at a certain point I might have to flip them. That's pretty funny. That was really dumb. I just don't like breaking out those big pots. I like using as small of a pot as possible whenever possible, because it just boils faster, but in this case I outsmarted myself. Now I'm taking some tongs and like holding the broccoli underwater, and I'm setting a timer for 4 minutes. So it's 5 to 6 minutes. They've already been in there for a sec. And then, looking ahead, we are going to pull these out using some tongs and put them right into the cold water rather than draining the water, because then this is the same water that you use for the pasta that I'm assuming maybe infuses it with a little bit of broccoli flavor and then is also just efficient, and it's already boiling. Okay, my timer is about to go off, but I am gonna give the broccoli another like couple of minutes. I've just been trying to turn it with the tongs. It's sort of like dissolving a little bit. So I'm gonna try to flip it if I can, and then just give it a little more time. 1 more minute. All right, call it good. I'm gonna bring over my bowl of water and then drop the broccoli into it. Using the tongs, salvage a couple of the smaller pieces, and then some of them are they just live in the water now. That's what they do. And they will contribute their flavor to the pasta. So the cold water, I believe, will stop the active cooking somewhat. Drain the broccoli and then put it on a plate with some paper towels to drain. Gonna blop the broccoli on the paper towels to get some of the moisture off. Thence to the cutting board where I will chop the broccoli. Finely. Not finally, finely, but also finally. Oh yeah, the florets. It's a fun word to say. And it's one of those words that like loses meaning the more you say it. I've gotten really nice and tender. The stem's still a little more firm. In a vacuum, I could have left it in the water a little bit longer to cool off more, be easier to handle. But like I said, we're on a timeline called We're Hungry. I realized I am literally chopping broccoli and had managed until this very second to not A, realize that, and B, reference the Dana Carvey bit. Chopping broccoli, hey. If you're not familiar with it, you must not have watched Comedy Central from the years 1996 to 2000, when the Dana Carvey stand-up special aired conservatively twice a day. And I watched it that much. The different media landscape. I'm always like, and I've even discussed on this show, I think when Mike Eagle was on and we were talking about like his kids' YouTube habits and just going like, yeah, kids will just watch this stuff for like 12 hours at a time, somebody else playing a video game. It's like, oh, that's so weird. But then also like the stuff that I was willing to watch for 15 hours at a time is also very weird. It's probably weirder because I think kids are more able to find stuff that actually appeals to their interest. Not that Dana Carvey's stand-up special didn't appeal to my interest, but I would just genuinely watch like 12 hours of so much different stuff. I mean, you just have to talk to like all the kids my age or a little older or a little younger who like watched a lot of Nick at Night, where you're just like, why did you watch that? It's like, because it was on and it was comforting and it just kept coming. All right, this is a good amount of broccoli. This is like healthy, you guys. I really like broccoli. Kids are dumb. All right, and then I'm going to, so next up we're going to be adding my water is still boiling. I'm going to be adding my pasta to it, and then in another skillet, heat up some olive oil and start cooking the aromatics, the garlic and the anchovies, the red pepper flakes. And it's going to go fast because this says al dente, 6 to 7 minutes. I'm going to check it after like 4. So here we go. It's going to be fast and furious. The pepe is in, the pipe rather. Or is it just pipe? Pipe regate. If you participate in a pipe regatta, you are classy. So adding about a tablespoon of olive oil. And then adding the garlic, anchovy, red pepper flakes. Okay, my oil wasn't quite hot enough, so not exactly sizzling on contact, which I don't love, but here we are. There we go, it's getting there. And we're going to be cooking, stirring, and infusing the oil with the flavors from the aromatics, and also as it cooks, breaking up the anchovy with the back of the spoon. I'm just trying to keep it moving as much as possible so the garlic doesn't burn. It says until fragrant. It is in fact fragrant, so now we are adding our chopped broccoli. Ooh, yeah, now we're sizzling. So this is where my short pasta cooking time gets me into trouble, because I am meant to season the broccoli with salt and pepper and then just kind of cook it until it keeps breaking down for about 5 minutes. But my pasta is almost done. My first timer just went off. So I think in a vacuum, this is all meant to time out really nicely because you have pasta that's cooking for like 9, 10, 11 minutes. It didn't really work out in my case. Okay. Pasta still has a ways to go, so that's good. And then basically the idea is I'm going to be adding in... Oh, that's why. Okay. There's so many ways in which I've messed up this recipe, and it was super simple. I guess the idea is that's why we slow down. I was meant to have added a cup of pasta water to the broccoli upon inception. And because I have so little pasta water, it's hard for me to grab it. There we go, I got it. This was all, I think, a little bit fruit from the poison tree of not having enough water to begin with. Because it was saying, oh, the broccoli is supposed to soften up, but there wasn't really a whole lot of liquid for it to soften up with. So then I'm supposed to grab another cup of pasta water while this is still cooking. I don't know how that's supposed to happen. Okay, I'm setting aside this other little bit of pasta water to add at the end if the pasta is dry. And I'm going to taste to see how the pasta is. I'm stirring the broccoli, testing the pasta. Okay. Yep, that's where I want it to be. Just ever so slightly short of al dente, so it'll keep cooking. And the broccoli looks really soft, so that's good. Also, among the comedy of errors, I hadn't added pepper before. Adding that now before I add the pasta to the broccoli. Stirring, stirring. All right, pasta goes into the broccoli. And all the other stuff. Stirring that around. Ah, the green color is really cool, I have to say. Scrape a few stray pastas out of the pot. So I've stirred to incorporate. I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil and stir again, just to make everything play nicely together. And I think add just a little bit extra degree of like sauciness to it. Although the broccoli is pretty well incorporated, so that's good. And it's like a neat bright green color. Looks really cool against the sort of grayish brownish whole wheat true grain pasta. Would that were product placement. All right, and now all I have to do is tip this into 2 bowls, grate Parmesan on top, and all you have to do is listen to this conversation between me and Mary Sasson. I was so excited to have her on the show. She is one of the more prolific home cooks in the comedy community, so long before I even had this podcast, we had been connecting over that, and I knew that this podcast, when I started, it was always on a collision course with Mary Sasson. She didn't disappoint. This was a super fun conversation, very wide-ranging, including, yes, the Real Housewives of everywhere. If you don't like reality shows, there's a 20-minute period in this conversation that you should like. Like, they're good. And eventually, you're going to make it around to the Real Housewives franchise, and you're going to realize we were right all along. Enjoy.
Sometimes I try to pretend that I have more things to do.
Oh, dude, I totally understand what you mean. Where it's like, on occasion, anything that I've had to do actually during this time where somebody's like, would that work? And I just want to be like, literally anything, like whatever.
Yeah, that one episode I like tweeted about, but the one episode where Homer's trying to buy Bart that microphone and Simpsons, and they're like, do you have any left? And he's like, yeah, a couple. Like, that's how I feel when people are like, ooh, do you have any time tomorrow to do this? I'm like, let me check. Yeah, I got some time.
Very much the same. Yeah, but you have to go through the motions a little bit.
Like, I had to, like, I got your email, and then I was like, okay, just like wait a few minutes so it doesn't feel like you're just waiting for people to send you emails to do their podcast.
Well, speaking of, here we are. Mary, if this were a normal episode of this podcast during normal times, I would be placing a plate of hopefully delicious food in front of you. But since it is not normal times. Obviously, we are underneath a yellow sky here in
Gosh,
Los Angeles. I assume you're still in LA.
I am. Yes,
Um,
yes.
all I can do is hope that whatever you ate last was delicious and satisfying and didn't have ash in it.
No, no, it did not. That's fun that you always make the guest some kind of treat.
I say that like it. I did it more than 3 or 4 times before, but I didn't. I did it literally 4 times, and then the pandemic. So I guess I've now done way more of this kind of thing than the other thing, but it's still like a weird stiff upper lip thing where I'm acting like, no, that is the way that things are done. I don't know.
That's fun. How do you decide what you'll make them?
I think basically just asking if they have any dietary restrictions,
Gotcha.
and then if there's anything that they like really, really strongly dislike, because I don't want to be making somebody something that they will like actively hate.
Of course, of course.
But other than that, just kind of if there's a recipe that I feel like making, and then now, so I still do like a cooking segment on the show, but now it's just pretty much like kind of whatever, partially what do we have around, and also like just what's a recipe that's kind of probably just caught my eye on social media in the past week and seemed cool, and not entirely just a complete copy of something that I've already made before.
Gotcha, gotcha. Do you bake as well?
I don't really. Do you?
I do. I think I started, not to get into things before I was supposed to, but I think I first baked a lot more than I cooked.
Oh, interesting. So that was kind of like a little bit of a gateway for you.
Yeah, I think that like when I was little, I always was trying to make chocolate chip cookies, and like 85% of the time they did not turn out right. I don't know. Like looking back, I bet it was like probably using like expired like baking powder and like margarine instead of butter, which probably doesn't do that much, but like just the way that I was doing it. And then when I nannied, I found out that like you can really be productive but get away from like actively watching the children by being like, I'm baking.
And are they helping, or are you just like doing your own thing?
A mix. Sometimes they will help and sometimes they really do like helping. But then a lot of like they, you know, that whole video right now that's viral of like that little kid that keeps trying to eat the butter
I
and
was
the
just
sugar.
gonna say, yeah.
There's that, and then also like they're not good at like measuring and even like dumping some. It's fun to play with them and be like, oh, this is a task you can do. But they also like they can't stir very well. There's so many things they can't do. But when you are nannying and like the parents come home and you're like, I made chocolate chip cookies, or I made a carrot cake, or I made, or things like you look like a super nanny. But a lot of what I was doing was just like, I'm doing my own task that feels like I'm still nannying, but I'm like taking a break.
It's just assumed that like, oh, certainly the children probably like helped frost them and did every, like there's just an assumed level of like they were probably very involved and stimulated.
Yeah. I also think that you can like justify like turning on the television and letting them watch a movie while you're like, you are kind of watching them, but you are doing a wholly different task. So I baked first, and just even learning that like baking is so much more of like a precise science, whereas cooking is a lot more free form, is interesting, just a different kind of muscle.
Was there a distinct moment where you went from screwing up the chocolate chip cookies all the time to being like, I got it? Were you always trying to do the same recipe? Were you searching for different recipes? What was the arc?
I think it was like just like buying my own ingredients. I think I probably was like making these chocolate chip cookies under the like my childhood home, which probably had like, I mean, how often are parents buying new baking powder? You know what I mean? If you're not like a baking family. And
which we should say it can expire. I feel like this becomes a big thing around like Thanksgiving a lot of times, where you sort of are like, wait, I read like, I feel like every article that you read that's like the secret to the best blank of your life, it's like eight times out of 10 it's baking powder or baking soda.
yeah,
And they can, and like baking powder in particular can like expire, and usually does, because like you said, you don't use it that much, and when you do use it, you're using a like eighth of a teaspoon at a time or whatever. So yeah, it goes it goes bad, particularly in parents' homes, and that becomes a thing around. I feel like particularly the holidays.
Yeah, where like you're going into someone else's kitchen, which is always an interesting thing of like what you assume every kitchen has. And when you go into a new person's kitchen and it's like, you don't have a colander? Like, how do you strain pasta? Like, and then you just kind of learn, you're like, oh, I don't have to, or something like that. Or like, oh, I just put like the top slightly off. And it's like, the fact that you're not covered in boils. But yeah, I do think that it's like, just like going home and being like, okay, I just assume, like, I grew up like with a very white bread family. Like my mom is mostly just Irish. So like we never had like physical garlic. Everything was like in a powder.
My favorite Led Zeppelin album.
Yeah, physical garlic. Um, and so like not until I went to college where I was like just around other people was I was like, oh, other people are like chopping up garlic. And then when I went back home and I wanted to like cook Christmas dinner, I had to like remember like my mom does not have butter. She always has margarine. She does not have physical garlic, and she doesn't have olive oil in her house.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, like things that I just, and mostly because it's like she just cooks very cheaply. And like, I mean, I'm one of 8, so it was like big mass produced, like, she mostly was like rehydrating other, like, that's what like cooking from the 50s ended up being, was like, you're just putting, like, rehydrating things in like boxed potatoes. You're just rehydrating potatoes kind of thing.
Right. Well, because they needed all of that moisture for World War II. So
Yeah.
by the 50s, it was all used up, and then they just had to like put it back.
The Marshall Project just gave all of our moisture to Germany. So we were like, we'll go without, we'll rehydrate. But
right. But so she's, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just had to like remember that when I was like trying to make like a roast beef and like green beans and things like that. Of just like, oh, things I take for granted, you don't have.
Right. Yeah. I do think I feel like that's such a big leap. It's almost like but like, as you're describing it, it's almost like your mom is running like an industrial kitchen, basically.
Yeah.
Like that's how she has to think about it.
In some ways, she was cooking for a prison.
Yes.
It's just, it was a lot of like opening up crescent rolls kind of thing. And it was like all of our vegetables were like frozen from a bag kind of thing, which is not unusual, I bet, for a lot of people. But I think that like, it wasn't until I was older where I was like, oh, broccoli isn't terrible. It's just was never prepared for me in any kind of like appetizing way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What was the like culture, not even just of food, but of like eating in your house? Because I know that Haley is the oldest of 4, and even just with 4 siblings, all fairly close in age, with like 2 brothers who were like teenagers at the same time and adolescent at the same time, there was just a real sort of like ravenous thing going on, like to the point where now if we are eating something that is, it's like, oh, okay, this is like a dessert that we're going to share or we're going to whatever. She's like, I know it's silly, but I really need to like divide it up myself and know what you're going to have and what I'm going to have, because otherwise I just get this unreasonable panic that I'm going to turn around and it's going to be gone, because any food that they had in their house was just immediately devoured. Was it like that?
I think like in dinner, my mom always just made too much. So there was enough like dinner food. And also it was like, not that, like there was a lot of it, but none of it was like great. Like my younger brother told the story that when he was playing football in college and all the kids were talking about like what kind of like, oh, I miss my mom's cooking, that his coach was like, hey, Sasson, your mom cooks well? And he was like, no, she doesn't.
Oh, no.
But when we would ever like, you get like bring ice cream in for like a birthday, like we didn't have a lot of like extra like snacks and things like that. So when like there was like soda for a cookout or like ice cream for a birthday, that got eaten so quickly that we got used to like littler kids, because I'm the 6th of 8. I'm one of like the babies, to like you would hide soda in like the fridge and you would just like squirrel stuff away because otherwise it was going to be eaten in a night. And I think I've had to reteach myself that like there's just you and Matt. You can like eat ice cream slowly. It can be here tomorrow.
Did you ever go to soda hiding place?
It was just like our fridge again also was just like packed with leftovers. So you could just like like in the vegetable crisper underneath, or like just in the back of the fridge. And what would happen is like late in the night when all the soda it felt like was drank, you would come strolling in with a soda, and one of my siblings would be like, "Where the fuck did you get that?"
All eyes go to the soda.
Yeah,
Moisture is beating on it.
everybody was just like, "And where was that?" And it's just like, I thought ahead. It's kind of the culture.
I don't know that I still do really like soda. I don't have it super often, like especially not right now where we're not like just, maybe you're grabbing lunch at a place where you're just going to get like a soda. But soda nothing will ever taste better than like soda did as a preteen or teen who probably for all kids, but we also didn't have it in the house. It was like only maybe a like 2 liter with pizza, like once a month or something kind of a thing. So, it was so good. And I have to imagine in a household where everybody thought it was already gone, but you produced yours like that. Oh,
yeah.
What a treat.
I think a lot now, being someone who like within the next 5 or so years will have children, thinking about like how I was raised with food and how I want to raise them differently in some ways. And some of it is like, I do think that if you never have soda, it becomes such a forbidden fruit. And I was just so addicted to it. And my mom hated it. So we got it very rarely. It was like 4th of July, Memorial Day. And like you said, like if we were going to get pizza ordered, we could like beg to get soda. But she hated it. And it made me such a little crackhead for soda. And then there's a period of time where my older brother, who's 10 years older than me, he moved back after college and got a job working at Coke. And I think he would just bring home a bunch of soda that was like technically expired, but it's soda, you know what I mean? And I just remember drinking like 20 ounces, just like bottles of soda, and just like it being so bad for me.
I will say I do think soda can actually expire at a point, although this may be like an environmental thing as well. We would have in my parents' house as like grown-ups, like my aunt would be like, okay, I only want to have like Diet Coke when I come over for like the holidays, and nobody else really like I like Diet Coke, but like nobody around their house after I moved out was like actively drinking a lot of Diet Coke. So they just would have like, okay, we got a 6-pack of those like weird little half bottles like 6 years ago, and we've been placing them in and bringing them back out of cool like ice chests that are in the backyard for these like parties that we're only having like once or twice a year, and it's in Phoenix, so like at least half the year it's just like blisteringly hot outside. So I think something about the getting cold and getting brought back in and whatever, like eventually I remember being like, I'm gonna have one of those. A Diet Coke sounds kind of good right now, putting it in the fridge, getting it back out again, and being like, something has
happened.
Like there's a flatness and a you know what I mean? Like just there was like something happened.
Yeah, I don't know if you can skunk soda, but that's how you do it.
Yes,
exposing it to like heat and light and moving it around and getting it hot and cold. Like you traumatize.
Oh yeah, it's work. It's work. It's harder than not doing it.
I do think also like losing its carbonation is a big thing.
That's a
like
that's
I bet
a big
and I think it was probably one of those things that's like more quality control than like health wise expired. You know what I mean?
Yes, precisely. Like I'm sure it's still like as not good for you as it was. But so what you're advocating is a kind of like just like soda decriminalization around your house where it's sort of just like it's around, it's fine, so it doesn't have the sort of like just extra aura of like something we're not supposed to have.
I think so. I think that if you make it, because also I would go over to people's houses as a kid and was just a little monster, just eating all their snacks. Because it was like we had like pretzels, and sometimes we had that like iced tea that you like stir in from a powder, which was so gross to me and so like weirdly sweet, and sometimes we'd have that in like lemonade, but we didn't have a lot of like snacks. So if I went over to people's houses and they had like chips and things like that, I was like, oh my God, this is heaven for me. And I think that like, but the kids there never felt like it was that crazy. So it was just like, yeah, we can have chips, but they'll always be here, so we don't need to eat so many chips. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess that's a really interesting question, is like from a just like health and overall quality of life perspective, is it better to have a little chips all the time or like so much chips
Yeah.
every 2 weeks?
I think that who knows? Because I think also like all of those foods are like designed by scientists for us to crave them. Just
Yes.
because it's like, it's not, I mean, real, what does real mean? But it's like, it's chemicals in it that make us, even the type of like salt that they use is like, I believe reading something where like kosher salt specifically hits your tongue in ways that like other types of salt doesn't. And so that it just like triggers parts of your brain where like we just want fats and sweets and salt to survive. But like when you have like flavor blasted Doritos or like goldfish, it's just hitting like pleasure centers of your brain that like we would never get from like a strawberry.
Do you have any like, for that reason, I feel like very strong, weird, like food memories from when I was a kid that like nothing really happened, but I just associate, like, for example, Haley and I were talking about this recently. I really strongly associate there was a type of Ritz bits, or like the crackers, which is
Yeah.
like a small Ritz. I don't know if they still have them, but like small Ritz, it's like a sandwich, effectively a cookie. Like at that point, it's a savory Oreo. And it was, I believe they were like pizza flavored, like they were like cheese
Oh,
pizza flavored. And so they were like a little bit spicy. And I just remember eating those and watching the, I want to say 94 Nagano Winter Olympics. And that just being like
a mood.
lasered into my skull, like that taste, like my tongue eventually getting a little bit just like
Yeah.
completely desiccated because it's so salty. Do you like, are there any things like that stick out to you? Is it just being over at friends' houses as a kid? Or are there any things where you're like, that I just associate that food with that time?
I think there's a lot of those for me. I think that like I'm trying to think of like to piece them apart. I mean, the first thing that when you were talking about that, I will say that it reminded me of like combos, and it was like that pizza flavor. I bet there was one kind of pizza flavor like that, and combos just distributed it.
Yes, exactly. All the other places had to buy it
Yeah,
from
we're getting it
Combos.
from
They were the
combos.
only ones with the formula. Yes,
But also
exactly.
knowing it, it's like there's probably like two snack companies, and combos was like one of them. I think that like those those types of nachos you can only get at like a stadium for a game that's low level. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like
Yes, yes. Like the snack bar. It's like a place with a
yeah,
snack bar. Yeah.
yeah, that's like those round tortilla chips and that like orangish yellow nacho stuff and like three jalapenos. Like sitting in like a metal bleachers and eating those, I feel like, and like watching one of my brothers play football, kind of thing. Like that to me is just like that is like a moment in time.
And it's so good though. Like the thing of sort of like, that's going to be a whole, you have to be there like all day or like a lot of the day. And you kind of like don't really want to, but the feeling of like, in the time it's going to take me to like go down, and maybe my parents gave me some money and I can
Yeah,
like buy it and then come back and then I give them the change, like that's going to take up like a good amount of time. Or maybe I
yeah.
just feel that way because I'm like never been super into sports, but like the feeling of just like, okay, that's going to run down the clock and I get to have nachos or whatever
Yeah,
it
I
is.
think a lot because too I like come from a very sporty family where like everyone was in like 16 different leagues. Like I feel like so often just like it's a little league game. Like baseball's fun, but like this little league game doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
So
Because
those
like,
yeah.
oh,
Those
go ahead. Sorry, you were saying.
well those moments of like if my mom gives me $1, I can like you said, I can go to the concession stand, and going to the concession stand is an adventure because I have to kind of find out where it is. And then if it's like a home game, I kind of know what the deal is. But if it's an away game, it's like, whoa, what does this place have? Like, it's a whole adventure. And like you said, that could be like easily 20 minutes that breaks up this 2 hours we have to be here.
Yeah, I feel like I would just walk around like we would go to like professional games or like college games or whatever, because my dad was super into sports and he had like season tickets to ASU football, and I would just like go. It's like he was spending clearly like a lot of money for these tickets, and I would just like go with him, and it was great a lot of the times. And we would like, there was like stuff like before and after, and we would like spend a lot of time together, so it was really nice.
Yeah.
But it was also just so much time and I was so kind of tuned out to the sports of it all that I would just get up and like walk around the stadium like in a loop.
Yeah, there were definitely times like that. It's also interesting of how much our childhoods like you just let kids do that more. Like now thinking about like letting my kid walk around Arizona State's like sports complex is like what? But you were just allowed to be like, "Hey, in about 2 hours, someone's going to come find you or you come find your parent. In the meantime, you're like the bounds of where you can go are so big."
Yeah, and I had no, like, there wasn't even, this was probably before I even could have had a cell phone
Yeah.
as a kid. And even when that became a thing, like when I was in like maybe a little bit middle school, but really more like high school, when people started to have phones, I still didn't have one. So there was just no, I was just like untraceable, I
Yeah.
guess.
You just had to like hope that you knew when things were done and you could find your dad at that moment or like you came back at the right moments. But yeah, it is so funny to just think about like just letting your kid to go to the park and be like, well, I hope he comes back.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And just, and that feeling of being a kid and being where you are a little bit like, this is great. I'm so free. This is wonderful. Oh no, I'm lost. Oh God. You know, like that,
Yeah.
that quick turn.
Yeah. Or like, oh no, I like ran into some bad kids. I remember being
Yeah,
at like,
I had very few run-ins like that weren't entirely in my mind. Like I definitely would be like, I see some kids, they might be bad. I'll never have to find out. This is fine.
there were like like very little moments because mostly again having so many older siblings who were like I have my oldest brother's 10 years older than me. So like when you're little, if you have a 10-year older brother, like when I was in elementary school, he was like a star football player. So like nobody who knows who I am is going to like mess with me. But I do remember like going on a playground one time for like a soccer game or something. And these kids just decided they wanted to like fight us. And I remember being like a little kid and being like, hey man, I don't need any kind of drama with you. And then like a weird memory of them wearing like soccer cleats and being like, we got cleats on. And being like, what do you plan to do with, you're going to kick me with cleats? Like, what's happening?
But it sounds like it resolved itself.
Yeah, I remember my mom was also like a very hands-off mom, a very much like, go do what you can. But I remember her like, her coming to like screaming at those kids, like coming up the hill to be like, what are you doing?
I can see that they have gelled hair.
Yeah, they were like bad
and
kids
cleats. This is not going to
like
go well. All of their names are Shane.
Yeah, they were like bad kids from like a Ninja Turtles movie. Like
that is what I'm imagining. I'm imagining like denim vests with no like sleeves. Oh yeah, no, for sure.
That one redheaded kid from all the like Little Rascals era, like bad kid.
Oh yeah, do you mean is that the same kid as was? Because I feel like there's the kid who played like I want to say he's the bully in A Christmas Story. There's that kid who was like a bully, and he looks very similar to. I'm pretty sure it's not the same kid. He would have had to be so old at that point. But then like when you go all the way up to like American Pie with God, what is his name? That kid. You know what I mean? You know who I mean?
Wow, for a while it was just like gingers are bad. Gingers will be a weird like bully who will be ultimately humiliated, but like they're out to get us.
Yeah, the messaging was very, very tough. I never had to counter any of that. I don't think you did either, because neither of us have that complexion / hair color. But yeah, that must have been hard.
Yeah, what a weird thing to like demonize. A type of kid.
No kidding.
That must.
So did you since you had so many siblings, was there a like, what was the? Because I'm assuming there was one. What was the like family brand known to be going through like, you know, elementary school and middle school and high school, where teachers like, oh, you're a Sasson, you must be blank? Did they have like an expectation since they had seen so many of your siblings?
There definitely was, especially again being the sixth, that like the first day of school, it was like, oh my God, another one? And it was like, okay, thank you. And they'd always be like, are you the last one? And I'd be like, no, there's 2 more left. I think the brand was a lot of like, you either like loved the Sassons or you were deeply frustrated by them. Because I think the brand was like loud, funny, a little unruly, but like you either thought that was like really charming, because we weren't like bad to be mean kind of thing, but it was like you either were like, oh, I love that your brother was such a like charismatic kind of goof off, or you were like, I'm deeply frustrated with how much your older brother disrupted this class. And I kind of remember the teachers who didn't like my older siblings, it felt like they were like, and I'm not going to like you. And I kind of remember being like, well, buckle up, because I'm not offering anything else. I'm not changing my behavior. And it's the same thing you disliked my brothers for, kind of deal.
So you didn't feel like a pressure to react against that. It was just like, this is what I bring to the table. This is what we do.
I think by the time I was in high school, I had like calmed down a little bit as the like, I need to be, when I was like in elementary school, I remember like firmly kind of believing that like my job is to entertain the class, and you can either get on board or you can get in my way. But if you get in my way, you're just another thing I'm playing off of, because like I like was never disciplined. So like you can't do anything to me. Like I'm going to goof off, and I'm going to shout things out in class, and I'm going to like entertain the class. And if you try to be like a wall to me, like nobody is stopping me at home. So I'm just going to make your life harder. But like the teachers who like understood that I needed a certain amount of attention and a certain amount of like, okay, let Mary answer first. And okay, did you get out of your system? Okay, let's keep going. Who like in a weird way were like working with me, were like, great, we can do this. Just understand that like I'm kind of in charge of the class. And which is an insane mindset. But like towards like middle school and high school, once I felt that like teachers were like not letting me have certain privileges because of that behavior, and like they would like in fifth grade, they wouldn't let me in the gifted program because they're like, you can't control yourself in regular class. Why would we put you in the gifted program? Like, why would we take the gifted kids out so that they get more learning? We're not putting you in the gifted program to disrupt that learning. And I remember being like, well, that's not fair. And like somebody told me one time was like, you're always bad in the beginning of the school year, which makes teachers label you as bad. You need to make them label you as good. And then through time, once you've gotten their trust, you can be a little bad. Which is like kind of sociopathic, but I remember being like, you're right. I need to be good in the beginning. And then I can like loosen up. Because they'll have loosened up.
That's so messed up, though, in a weird way. It's just the idea that, I mean, it makes sense. And it's just like when we think about like how first impressions work and how all these things work, it's like, okay, like that's sort of, we kind of can't help but just be like, I am meeting you and I'm going to like be like what I first experience is going to loom pretty large for me. And especially, I guess, if you're a teacher where it's like I'm meeting like 30 plus kids every year, or like for high school and middle school teachers, like a lot more than that. And so I'm just like, I don't have time to like really shape more of an impression than that. But also it's just like such a bummer to think of kids getting kind of like tagged in that way and then being like, that's who you are. Okay, this is what you'll get. I'm not going to try to like work with that or see where else we can go with that or where you can go.
Yeah, and I see where the teacher was coming from, like you said, that it is just like they're in triage. So they're just like, they're like labeling and going kind of thing. But I do think that it made it be like, well, I never thought of myself as like a bad kid, because like I always was in control of what I was doing. I just was like, I had a different agenda than they did. You know what I mean? But I think that once they labeled me as like, you're this kid, it made me kind of be like, it's like when you track a student, you know what I mean?
Right.
That it made me be like, well, if you already see me as the bad kid and you can't change your opinion of me no matter how I act, then why would I? It's more fun to be bad. Like, why would I change my behavior? You know what I mean?
Right. No, absolutely. It's just sort of like you kind of create the person that you want somebody to be in a weird way. Like it's like I guess a self-fulfilling prophecy is the
it's the same thing of when they say like, you shouldn't tell a kid like, you're smart, you're this, you're that. Cause then they're always just like, I guess I'm smart, but they don't necessarily like work in the same way they feel like, oh, you're not good at math. It's just like for your whole life, you're like, I guess I'm not good at math. even if that's not
Ye-
based on anything.
Yeah, no, I don't know, for me, like, so much of my process with cooking has been, and starting to, has been, especially at the beginning, was really realizing that, like, the reason I didn't do it for so many years is because I was like, I don't do that.
Yeah. I think that I was talking to my husband Matt recently, and he doesn't like cooking as much as I do, and he was like, I'm just not good at it. It stresses me out. And then I was like, oh, I think you're not good at chopping. Like which is like very specific, but there's a lot of chopping
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
in
absolutely.
cooking. And I was like, I think you get stressed out by the chopping, and then the whole thing stresses you out. But you don't hate cooking, because he like made like a tomato sauce, and he was like really like feeling himself and feeling really like accomplished. And I was like, I think you just don't like chopping. And once you can get better at like chopping garlic and onions and things like that, and once you are like, no, I can cook. Like so much of when people are like, oh, you really cook, I'm like, I just follow recipes. And it's just like the confidence to follow recipes. And then there's like a higher level where you understand how flavors work and like the science and you know what I mean, the pairing of that. But I'm most of what I'm doing is that I can like follow a recipe.
So how have you, well, I guess let's, uh, not start here, but I guess that leads me to the question of just like the big general question of just like, where does home cooking fit in or not fit into your life at this moment?
I think right now, especially because of quarantine, like pretty high up there. Um, there are some moments where I'll just get kind of like tired because a meal can take like an hour plus getting ingredients and things like that. But I think it's a very soothing art project where you get to eat it at the end. Is how I always tell people why it's so fun. And I would say that we don't eat out that much right now. We'll go through like periods where it's like, oh boy, we like ordered out 2 or 3 times this week, but mostly I think we cook. And when I say we, I mean me. And I think that like it just feels like it's something to fill the day, to almost like you start around like 4:30 or 5 thinking about like what will dinner be, and like the whole idea of like, okay, let's find a recipe. What do we have? What do we need? Kind of thing. Like that whole
The
process.
switch. Yes, I love the switch. The sort of like, well, that's about it. Okay, what are we doing for dinner? Yeah,
Yeah.
is so great, especially right now when as we were discussing before we started recording, like there's not a whole lot of other external markers of like what does time mean.
Yeah, I also think that it's been interesting, like the adventure of I live near Thai town, so like going to this one Thai grocery store recently, and kind of like getting more confidence to be like, oh, I can cook Korean food or I can cook like Thai food. You know what I mean? And finding different. I think YouTube videos are very helpful for me along with recipes, but finding like new ingredients and figuring out how like new ingredients. And I went to that spice store that's in like Atwater Village, that Indian sweets and spices maybe,
Yes. Oh, the
and
best.
got a lot of spices from there. And like for a long time was cooking a lot of like vegan Indian food. Um, and that was just like a whole new like, whoa, look at like what's this chapter like?
Yeah, no, that's, I think once you get that, it's tough, like at the beginning where you're sort of going like, okay, these are the types of things that I'm cooking, and then you want to cook something that has like 4 or 5 different things that you don't have already just on hand or you're not super familiar with.
Yeah,
It's super daunting, but I do think once you, for stuff like Thai or like Indian food, like once you build up that pantry a little bit, it gets like the shortcut to making stuff in that world is so much more rapid. I feel like, was the Thai market Sealam?
I'm trying to remember. Is that the one that's right by the Ralphs?
Yes, it's underneath like I believe it's underneath a karaoke place that I can't imagine is currently operational, or at least like I feel like I went to karaoke there. This is probably like 7 years ago now, so I don't know what's there now. But there's a like it's on the like bottom story, and there
Yeah,
is a
like a shrine out
basically,
front.
yeah, exactly. There's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
there's like a shrine outside. Yeah.
Yeah, and that place was like fun even because it's like it had a lot of like dry goods, and a lot of places were like, oh, like restaurants buy from here because there's a lot of like big bulk stuff, which was really
Yeah.
interesting.
And they'll just have like a giant, like you could get if you wanted to, because I think at this point, like you're a restaurant, like you're saying, you could get a like giant like mortar and pestle. You could get like a huge, they have so much crazy like tools and stuff. Oh, I love that place.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it does feel like a little bit of an adventure, and I feel like you have to spend a certain amount kind of thing, because it's one of those places where it's like, we're not talking to you unless you spend at least, $15, whatever. But stuff is so cheap that it is just very interesting of like the things you can get. And then also from earlier, you were saying like how different cuisines feel daunting. It's interesting how much like every type of cuisine has like a base, which like I'm not like the first to ever think about this, but like realizing like, oh, Indian food always starts with like cumin seeds, like some kind of maybe like madras, powder, and just kind of like ginger and garlic and onion, and then we build from that kind of thing. And realizing those bases is very interesting.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And just going like, oh, that's why so much of what I like about Indian food has that very particular taste that nothing else has. And once you can make stuff that tastes like that for yourself, it's so cool. It really feels like you're like, I don't know, it's like a weird thing where it's like when you're a teenager or something and you and your friends are like goofing off with a video camera, and then suddenly, I don't know, you did something cool and then you're like, we made a movie, like it's almost that feeling of like, whoa, we're that. Like, it's so great. Yeah, I love that feeling is so awesome of like, oh, we made stuff that kind of tastes like the Indian takeout that we like to get, or the Thai food that we like to get, is so cool.
And then even realizing like, and I wish a lot of it I'm sure is like imperialism and just how cultures cross, but be like, oh, how does like cilantro fit into Indian food so much, but also like Mexican food and like like Latinx food, and just kind of being like, oh, like the ground cumin here, and like just that crossover is very interesting when you'll realize it.
And I have no idea. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying.
But it is interesting. Yeah, I would love to know. I would love to know if it's just like, oh, is it because that is the type of thing that grows even just in that particular like latitude of the world? You know what I mean? Where you'll get things where it's like, okay, all of coffee comes from this band on Earth that I do think is probably expanding because of global warming. But like, oh, this type of thing grows in this place, even if they're on different continents, for that reason. And how they both ended up there, I have no idea. And I bet you're right. I bet it does have a lot to do with like colonialism and different trade and stuff. But yeah, that's so interesting. I never thought about that there's such a big crossover, like cilantro wise, between Indian and Mexican.
Well, sometimes also you'll think of food is like must grow in Latin America because it's in so much of this. And then you'll find out like, oh, that's from China. And then it's just kind of like, oh, what was that? I mean, where did it go? Where did it come from? And things like that. And it's very interesting. And like, I mean, that would be a whole, even just different book to read of like, oh, where corn was introduced and how that, like the difference between like even corn and wheat with like tortillas and stuff like that. Like learning a little bit about that is very interesting, and like how that like just makes different foods and what you can make.
Oh yeah, no, it's really cool. I feel like I had that experience with like flour tortillas, because we grew up only eating like flour tortillas at home. And then I feel like when I went away, and I'm from Arizona, and when I like went away to like college in New York, and then I think also around that time, just like, I think it was, in the past like 15 years where tacos have really had this kind of sort of like co-opted. Now it's like a highbrow thing, or people who wear like taco trucks are really cool, just a sort of like a new spotlight on like tacos, and particularly like people going like, hey, tacos doesn't mean like it's a crunchy shell full of ground beef and like shredded cheese and all this different stuff. It's like, this is a taco, like this like thing with just like meat in it is a taco. I remember feeling like, oh, maybe we just had flour tortillas growing up because like, I don't know, we're lame and we weren't really having the whatever, because everything's like corn tortillas, corn tortillas, corn tortillas. And then when this place in LA, Sonora Town, opened in downtown LA, that's a really cool, like elevated kind of taqueria. And their whole thing was like, this is Sonoran food. We have flour tortillas. We do the whole thing. I was like, oh shit. We were just, granted, we were having, especially at home, very, very sort of just like middle American white bread versions of things, like absolutely for the most part. But when we were eating out, or even when we were having like flour tortillas at home, like why the reason that we would default to that is because it's like, oh yeah, we're in the Sonoran Desert, like the Mexican food that's from here. Because also we're in this is Mexico. We're in Mexico effectively, with the exception of like, Manifest Destiny, I think basically. And this is like why we're eating flour tortillas. And I realized like, oh, that's neat. Not to say like, it's like flour tortillas, that's not my like actual ethnic heritage. I can in no way claim that, but sort of realizing that like, because of specifically where I grew up, it did filter down to being part of specifically my culture in a weird way was cool and interesting. And then I think also does feel a little bit dicey when you think about like stuff getting co-opted and kind of like, just sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? I think you used it and now I can't think of what the word is, but like, not gentrified, but like what, with food.
Oh gosh.
Why can't I think of this fucking word?
I don't know. I'm trying to think even like what it specifically, but it is just like how much food with the trade and everything is like how much food is like in the culture, and like just even realizing like what areas and like regions you're dealing with. And I grew up again very like Pittsburgh specifically even has like very specific like pockets of different cultures, but I grew up with a lot of my childhood friends were Indian because a lot of their parents came over to work in like labs at Carnegie Mellon and Pitt and like things like that. So like I grew up with like eating a lot of Indian food at their house, but like very little like Mexican or like, I mean, I didn't have like a pupusa till I was in LA or anything like that.
And what would you say, like growing up in Pittsburgh, like what were those cross sections? Like what how would you describe sort of like Pittsburgh food, especially as you experienced it growing up and then to now?
I think that there's like almost like the first wave of like, there's like two waves of immigration in Pittsburgh as I like kind of grew up in it. And like, even like the Pittsburgh accent where people are like, oh God, this is so wild, is it's like cultures that came to work in the mills. So it's like there's a huge Italian culture. There's a huge like Polish culture. And like, there's like Irish and, things like that. But Irish food is nothing. It's like what poor slop you can have. But there's also a huge like Jewish culture. So there was a lot of like pierogies and kielbasa and like those things were just kind of like around, and like, bagels and, just smoked salmon and things like that. Because like the neighborhood, because there's so many hills, almost like Greece, was broken up in like little city states kind of thing. So you would have like, oh, this is the Italian neighborhood. But like, then I think like another wave was like a lot of like when the steel industry collapsed and like technology became a huge sector in medicine in Pittsburgh, that it like a lot of, I would say, and specifically I think that like these kids went to just my high school had a lot of friends who were like Bangladeshi and Indian and like Pakistani and like Chinese and, just different like areas of Asia. But I think that like that now I think there's like more of like a Latinx population there. But when I used to joke that like the only person I knew growing up who was Latinx was this girl who was a Polish Mexican Jew named Stephanie Chinkowski.
Does it frustrate you with all of that, like everything you just described, where it's like this big tapestry of like different cultures of like various waves of immigration and also various waves of like what the city was and like what it's become now, that it all just gets boiled down to French fries on a sandwich from Primanti Brothers?
It is. It's so funny because like I had my wedding in Pittsburgh, so like made my like friends fly in there, and now they'll on podcasts I'll hear them like make like Pittsburgh references because it feels like, okay, I could do this, and it always
I own it. Oh, by the way, speaking of exactly that, I remembered the word we were trying to think of before, which was cultural appropriation.
Oh, yes.
So if you wanted to hear two cis white comedians on a podcast not be able to remember the word cultural appropriation.
It's probably just not important. Exactly. It doesn't affect us. It doesn't affect us. It's not the front of my mind.
I feel like it was like my brain was so like, I know this is a like delicate issue, particular with food. So I think my brain was like, you know what? I won't even let you remember the word.
Just breeze past it.
Yes, precisely. So sorry, you were saying you've heard your friends reference, felt like they have like a little bit of like a Pittsburgh card now.
Yeah, like, and I get it. It's just one of those things where like when you just like know the specifics of something, it's like fun to play with that. But I don't even like permane sandwiches. I think that they're just fine. And to me, they're like almost like a tourist thing. But it's always, I think, even in Pittsburgh, people will be like, you've got to try permanes. But I think it's because like travel shows keep saying this is what's the exciting thing, which is like creating this feedback loop of then Pittsburghers being like, this is what's exciting. But I think that it's like such a non-story kind of thing. It's interesting that the sandwich was created because like truckers would come through and they needed a sandwich that had everything on it so they wouldn't have to like bend down and get French fries kind of thing. Like that's why the fries are on the sandwich. But it does feel very much like, even I think people would be like, oh, from Pittsburgh, would your dad work at a steel mill? It's like the steel industry collapsed in the 70s.
He does work at a steel mill. He is an Android app programmer. In a farmer's
It's like, I think the first open heart surgery happened in Pittsburgh, and like we developed the polio vaccine, and like it's like a huge like robotics, and like Billy Porter went to CMU, for acting. It's like there's a lot of depth to the city, but I think that it is just kind of like you have like sports teams and a steel industry, and it's like a cloudy little place.
Yeah, I do think, I don't know, it's almost what you're describing with like that feedback loop of like the cooking shows and then a city basically being like, this is what people keep paying attention to, so this is what we will continue to lead with and advertise, is almost like that teacher thing that you were describing of just like they sort of get tracked, or it's like very quickly people are just like, well, this is a place we can film and this is where we'll go, so here you are. It's almost like, I feel like why every LA set reality show they eventually take an improv class is because they're just like, oh, this is what it's here, it's what it's known for, it's visual. I feel like that's also a big thing too, is just like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But can't they also go to, no, it's not, is it, there's some, I wish I could remember what it was. There's some other movie, because as we have discussed in real life, my stepmom is from Pittsburgh, and there's some movie that she and my grandma always reference that's like, well, that's obviously the famous movie that like filmed in Pittsburgh. And now I can genuinely not remember what it was. I want to say the thing that keeps... Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was going to try to narrow it down if you could remember specifics.
Please. I was going to say the thing that keeps coming to mind is like, it's called like Once Upon a Pizza or something like that. I always remember they're like, it looms very large for them, but I'm like, I don't know if that is an actual famous movie.
Once Upon a Pizza is the name of the movie? Or that's what
that's what my brain is feeding me, but this is the same brain that couldn't remember the term cultural appropriation for 10 minutes. So
the big movies, I feel like there's Striking Distance, where the old Penguins arena is like there's a bomb on it and like Jean-Claude Van Damme needs to solve it. And then there's a movie where Sarah Jessica Parker and Bruce Willis are like boat cops. And I'm trying to remember what that movie is called.
Are we talking like 80s Sarah Jessica Parker?
Yeah, it's like at least
90s?
early 90s. It's pre Sex and the City, and they are like on a like speedboat for most of the time. I've never seen it, but I like just know that I'm gonna look it up real quick. But yeah, I think again it's that thing where it's like, I think Pittsburghers have this like very small unified town of like nobody thinks much of us. So we are very proud of what we have. And if you like meet another Pittsburgher, it does feel like, well, we know what we have and we know we're a strong city and we know that we're doing all this stuff. But I think it's like that little kid syndrome where you're just kind of like, well, come on, we've got this. We're that kind of city.
Right. It's the vacillating between inferiority and like superiority.
Okay, I was wrong. Striking Distance is the boat cop movie. Sudden Death might be the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie.
That sounds right. I did not know that filmed in Pittsburgh.
Yes. Ex-fireman Darren McCord has a new job working security at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena. Hoping to impress kids, he scored tickets to the Stanley Cup Finals, unaware that the place has been taken over by a group of terrorists. Okay, that does seem like something I need to watch tonight.
I was going to say, I'm a little bit, as soon as you were reading that, I was like, we should have just been reviewing Sudden Death.
Okay, we're going to watch Sudden Death. Matt has
just completely hijack what this podcast
Everything
is
about that description was like, yeah, that ticks a lot of boxes of a movie that, like, even if it's bad, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So do you have, has being from there, like, influenced how you cook at all? Do you feel like, did that give you a gateway into like, this is what I'm going to make? Or like when you were making that transition into being like, I'm somebody who cooks all the time, because that's definitely how I, like, even before quarantine, like I would see you making food a ton on social media, and you are somebody in the comedy community who I thought of as being a like pre-quarantine home cook. You know what I mean? Like you were in on the early, you liked the early albums kind of a thing.
It feels like one of the few things you can share on social media that like maybe people hate it, but it feels at least like neutral to positive. Is I think
couldn't agree more.
That's why I like it, because it's like not like bragging about having a job. It's not like selfies. It's not, you know what I mean? Like so I think it just makes people be like, that's fun. Which sometimes is all I'm trying to do with my social media.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's just very just like, oh, that looks nice. Maybe it'll make me go like, oh, I should make that. And then because it's like, it's a recipe, or, you know, oftentimes it's like, then you can go make that and it's just completely harmless and sweet. Yeah. I feel like that's really for Instagram for me, as it was like, that was the gateway drug to Instagram, was just like, oh yeah, it's just nice food and people's babies. And that's pretty great.
Yeah, I think that I've like thought about getting like a better case for lighting, because sometimes I'll be like, this looks so good, and I'll take a picture. I'm like, this looks like slop. What am I doing? But
I have bookmarked, and I should. It's so weird. This is like, maybe this is too meta of a discussion, but like I used to take pictures of a lot of what I would make, and then I started doing this podcast, and I was like, I definitely got to do it now, because it would be so great. I can post the pictures online and whatever. And for whatever reason, it has now been like, I can't take a picture of it. I'm doing a whole show about it, where it's like, I should just take a picture of it. I should just do whatever. But also like, now I really want it to look good. And I feel like oftentimes it'll look better in like natural light is like one of the only things I know. And then like, it'll end up paralyzing me to be like, well, then I ended up making it, and then it was on Saturday night, and I think it's really good, but it didn't come out looking that good. And so now it's ended up in this weird place where I'm like, I think I need to do exactly what you were describing, because now I'm like, this is part of what I'm doing for like my my career. It's not like I'm making money off this, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, that's just sort of a like weird, it's now become that where I'm like, well, if I want to get serious about it, I should get a ring light for my food. But I know exactly what you mean, where I'm just like, it's ended up going from a very just kind of like, this is just, I post a picture sometimes of food. And now that I'm like, I do a whole podcast about it, weirdly, I'm like, it's made me an extra layer of self-conscious.
It's not like a benign habit anymore. And I think that I'm always like probably too self-conscious about somebody looking at that and like, why is Mary even sharing this? This is fucking slop. But it has made me be more conscious of presentation, and moments where I'll be like, oh, I have to take it again, like part of the sauce smudged onto the rim of the bowl. I can't have that. That looks unsightly, kind of thing. When people are probably scrolling past and not paying any attention to it.
No, I know 1,000,000% what you mean. Like way too much. Or you like put it on like, especially right now, like put it on the corner of the counter in your kitchen. And then it's like, oh, there's a little bit of flour or something there. And I feel weird. And then it's just like it's too much. And I short circuit, and I shouldn't. I think your attitude of like, it's like, they're not going to dwell on it, it's not going to be a whatever, I think is probably, I need to buy a little bit of that back for myself, because it's gotten ridiculous, especially right now, where it's just like, I feel like I'm like, no one can see any part of our house. It is too quarantine chic.
Yeah, I think I try to like, I'm sure we all do, almost like the therapist version of our mind, who tries to like talk us out of what we feel are unrational irrational thoughts of just kind of like, yes, there are people, because they've said this around you, who will zoom in on photos and look how dirty things are and see this or that. But we know those people are being unreasonable. So don't cater to the most unreasonable of your friends. You know what I mean? Is how
Yeah, no,
how I
exactly.
try
No,
to
that's
think
such a
about
good
it.
point. Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, so when you think about that person, are you going like, that sounds like a good person whose approval I want?
Yeah, and I think that it's like, then even I imagine even that person telling someone else what they found in the back of a photo of like, oh, isn't this like stove so messy? If they zoom in to show another friend that, they're gonna be like, yeah, because stoves are messy. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also I try to think of it too, like our kitchen is always in various states of like, we also don't have a dishwasher, so it's always in some state of like upheaval.
Yeah.
But especially right now, it's like, it's because we use it all the time. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like when you see people's, like in like real estate reality shows, or just in people's social media and people's whatever, it's like, yeah, if they have a beautifully immaculate kitchen, it's for one of two reasons. They have like somebody who comes in and
Yeah.
cleans it all the time because they're rich, or they don't use it. So it's fine. Like they have a Keurig in the corner and they just go in the corner and make coffee. And that's the only thing that they use their kitchen for. Speaking of which, I know that you and Matt watch a lot of reality TV. We can talk about this more if you guys watch this show, but I'm obsessed with people making food or beverages on reality shows and like seeing the weird ways that people do it. We just watched an episode of Selling Sunset, which, have you guys watched that?
We've watched like some from season 1, some from season 2. We have not gotten into it as much as other people, but I will know probably like the gist of what you're saying.
Gotcha. Okay. So Christine, who's like one of the villains, she's kind of the like alpha mean girl at the real estate place. In the season, I want to say 3, she's now got this very wealthy fiance and she's living in like a really nice house.
Okay, yeah.
And they go into this giant, amazing kitchen with like 6 ovens, and it's just an incredible kitchen. And she's like, oh, I don't do anything in this place but like make coffee or tea. Do you guys want like coffee or tea or whatever? And they're like, oh, I'll have tea. And so she's like, okay. And then it cuts to like a few minutes later and she pulls the tea mugs out of the oven. I believe that she poured water into the mugs.
Oh, and heated them in the
oven.
Oh, I'm obsessed with like the alien ways in which people like they get like taken out of reality by becoming too wealthy. What a waste of power.
Yes, absolutely. You had to make so many cubic inches of air so hot to make this thing by extension. Oh yeah, no, just incredibly. The amount of like BTUs, is that a measure of oven strength? I don't think it is. I think that's air conditioning.
Like,
but anyway,
it's something.
Yes. Oh yeah, no, it's terrible, but also it's great too, because I'm like, we were literally just talking about, I'm like, you shouldn't judge people for what they're doing in their kitchen or what they post or what they share. And then I'm like, this person on this reality show, but I'm also a little bit like, that's a reality show. That's what it's for. I'm meant to like micro judge it just for my own personal entertainment, and that's what they're getting paid
There were a lot of little moments where like Lisa Vanderpump, who like for sure she was having a private chef, would be like, well, I'll just whip this up, and she would start like cutting or doing things, and I was like, oh, you've never touched a knife in your whole life.
Those are my favorite. Yeah, so we should say for viewers at home that Haley and I and Mary and Matt are both avowed and very aware of each other's enthusiasm for the Real Housewives franchises. And Lisa Vanderpump, formerly of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, and of Vanderpump Rules, her like spin-off show about her restaurants. My favorite scenes in those in Vanderpump will be like, usually the rest of the gang is out of town because they're all in their like 20s and 30s and they're like having fun and they're the main cast of the show. But then they'll show Lisa Vanderpump, who is runs a restaurant empire and is like wildly successful, shouldn't need any more plaudits from anybody, but to like, I think like shape her image and just show like she's still really hands-on in the restaurant. They'll always have these little moments where they'll like cut back to her at the restaurant in LA and she'll be like tasting something and she'll be like, it needs more sage.
Yeah. Well, you know what also is interesting? And I realized it recently because the reality shows like Bravo is like now like taking away episodes that have like issues. Like I think on TikTok that like Southern Charm, multiple episodes have just disappeared, and it's when they talk about like living on plantations and things like that. And sometimes I'll rewatch stuff and be like, I remember this moment, but where did it go? And a moment like that for Lisa Vanderpump is there was a moment in an early season where she was talking about how she like basically kidnapped her maid because like her maid was going to work for another family and was like walking up the hill in like the development. And Lisa Vanderpump was like, I'll give you a ride. And then basically was like, how much do you get paid? I'll pay you more. You're my maid now. And I've never been able to see that moment again, but I for sure saw that moment in television. And I don't know if like television was like, let's get that out of here. Like it was quirky moment of how wealthy someone can be that they can just like adopt someone's maid. But now we think that that could be like, wait, what? Lisa Vanderpump just like stole this maid off the street in like a real Arrested Development moment.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is so, it's very strange. And it's very like, I don't know. I feel like for those people, it's a little bit like, okay, so you are, you know, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's coming from a good place. It just feels like it's coming from a like self-protective place of like, we don't want you to be mad at us.
Yeah.
More so than like we're doing this out of sensitivity for how other people might feel about it. Cause I imagine on like Southern Charm and other shows like that. We've never watched Southern Charm in particular, but I know a lot of people that really like it. And it's like a lot of what is entertaining about it, or at least like interesting in a car wreck sort of way, I would imagine would have to be these like rich, out of touch,
yes,
like white Southern people from a ton of money who've never really had to like work, being clueless about certain shit. And then people being like, whoa, man, you can't do that. It's 2015 or whatever, like at the time. Well, you would think
Southern Charm specifically, and as people who are also very like class conscious, it is very interesting because it says things. They're like the Southern Charm that's set in God, which one is it? Not Savannah, not New Orleans, Charleston. It's like old money, but a couple people who are not old money, and there are moments where like one character will like outwardly be like, yes, I'm partying all day and I'm 45 and I like break my arm because I'm an idiot partying, but I have mailbox money and I live off of investments and I'm allowed to do that. You don't, so you can't. Like it's so nakedly like, I come from, my money makes money. I am allowed to be an idiot. I'm allowed to do whatever I want. You are studying to be a lawyer. You have to go be a lawyer because you don't get mailbox money. Like it says quiet parts loud. Which is like very interesting to me.
No kidding. And so their argument there is just like, I get to criticize you for like being lazy or not working because you do have to work, whereas yes, I don't have to. Therefore, when I do it, it's not bad.
There's two characters, and one of them is just like, when you find out his age, you're like, whoa, I thought you were like 30 the way you act, but he just like drinks and whores around all the time. He does nothing. At one point he keeps trying to buy this plot of land that is a swamp. they're like nobody will give me a loan for it because they said it's like uninhabitable, but he's like, I think I'm just gonna buy it. Like he's just a dummy. But because he just is like, he comes from like old, like his family has been there since like the 1700s 1600s kind of thing. Everybody is like, he's got his life together. He's got his stuff together. Whereas this other kid who was like in like law school and like trying to pass the bar, he's acting similarly. And everyone's like, you need to get your shit together. And he's like, I'm not doing anything differently than this guy. And everyone's like, it doesn't matter. There are two different rules for people. And it's just so interesting for them trying to like justify. And like the Andy Cohen, like reunions where he's just like, but you two are doing similar things. Why is it okay? And like later on in the like later seasons, I'm trying to remember these people's names. Craig is the one who's the lawyer, but the other one who's not a lawyer is blatantly just kind of like, he starts just being like, I don't like poor people. Like get them away from me. Like very nakedly just kind of being like, I'm allowed to do what I can do because like I have money and it doesn't matter. And like, yeah, I told her she was trash. She's trash kind of thing.
Yikes. Yeah, I guess you have to like, oh, it's so gross, but I guess every person has to sort of like rationalize whatever their experience is in a way that can like make it make sense to them where they're not the villain.
It's just fun because like I think that it's like maybe the first time because of this show that he's realizing like, oh, everyone keeps because one of my favorite things about reality TVs is I don't like follow a lot of people on social media, but on the reunions when they'll be like social media didn't like that moment. And that like we almost get like and we're getting off track for cooking, so if you want to cut all of this out, but
Not in the slightest. No, this is it's all tangentially related because the point is when they go into their kitchen, giant beautiful kitchens to cook, and then they start cutting stuff up with a steak knife, you're like, you don't know how to cook.
I just love the focus group aspect that like there's constantly people watching this and it's like, well, the results are in. You thought you were the villain this year, but the focus group decided that you were the villain, kind of thing. Like, I just love those moments of, like, everybody did take issue with this moment, and you thought that you were the right one. And they'll have to, like, kind of bend that. That they'll be like, okay, yes, Twitter got mad about that, and I'm now apologizing. But they would not have apologized otherwise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, oh, no, absolutely. And watching people navigate that is super interesting. And seeing where it's like, I think you have to, like, strike this weird, it's like this weird, like, middle zone that you have to exist in. I was thinking about this week because we were watching the Real Housewives of New York reunion, and they had just had like, there's just been like a real breakout new housewife. And I was just thinking about like, oh yeah, you have to kind of modulate between like, you need to have some behavior that's really kind of like crazy and interesting. And people are like, whoa,
yeah.
But you can't only do that. You have to also be kind of like, but I am a person and I have a family and I have a whatever. And you do kind of have to have conflicts with people. And you even do almost have to be in the wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's like, how many times are you in the wrong? How far out on the limb do you go? Who are your allies? Who are your enemies? It's the best.
Well,
I love it so
also
much.
you can't, and this is the last thing I'll say is you can't be so bad that people won't film with you. I think that's something my sister pointed out a long time ago when I started watching like Beverly Hills, that she was like, that person went too far. Now no one will film with them. And I think that that's a thing where it's like, oh, you've got to like toe the line and figure out what kind of character you are. But you can't go too far where people are like, you're a liability. I'm not playing with you anymore.
Yeah, Haley was saying that she had read that Andy Cohen basically said like, people like we love basically like when people are housewives that people like love to hate.
Yeah.
That's like never a problem for us, obviously, because like you love to hate that you're going to tune in.
Yeah.
What becomes a problem is when people become people that people hate to hate.
Okay, interesting.
Do you know what I mean? Where it's just like, okay, you've now crossed a line where it's just like, there's such a tough line between like, and maybe everything that we're describing is like what's entirely wrong with the world. But like when somebody's just like, well, they're at it again. It's so that person and they're doing that thing. Ooh, they're a villain. But then it just becomes like, oh no, I genuinely am like, I'm looking into like the depths of you're the worst person ever. It's like, okay, I don't want to watch that.
That's interesting because I think that they might be done with Dallas. We watched the most recent season of Dallas because one of the main characters was pretty racist against this woman who was Mexican. And I think that it made them be like, we can't come back from this. Like
right.
We're past where this woman can redeem herself at all. But she was like the driving force for like most of the drama. And I think Dallas might just be done.
Wow. That'll be interesting. You're referring, of course, to Leanne.
Yes.
And no, I think you might be right where it's like, yeah, she's clearly done. And I do think you're just like, yeah, I mean, she was a terrible person leading up to that. But again, in an entertaining way. And then when it turned into that, and then no amount of people being like, this is why this is bad. You cannot do this. Only added to her like doubling down on it. It really did go from love to hate to hate to hate.
I think also what was tough was that like, and this is what it makes, and I don't remember if I like read this or I'm just like guessing, and I could be completely wrong. But that last reunion, they were like, why didn't anybody speak up about this? Why didn't anybody tell this woman that these things were said about her? And everybody was like, well, I didn't think you were going to put this in the show, basically. And Andy had to like really take him to task. And I think everybody was like, we're not showing this. There's no way this goes out. But the fact that nobody did anything and they're like, no, we're airing this, I think made them all look really bad.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do think, yeah, I could see that. Because also it's like, without Leanne, it doesn't work.
You lose the engine and then you've lost, like, these other people can't just be like innocent, because it is just like, well, you only really told people once they said this is going to go on camera, which is a whole thing. Before I forget, I will say my brother works at, like, he sells high end appliances, like the kind that these people would have in their houses. And cool. Now he will like delight. He knows I get so frustrated by it, but delight me at like the prices of some of these things. And also apparently, like, because like his job never got shut down because they classified what he does as essential, because like construction has been deemed essential. And right. You would think that in this time with the economy and everything, people would be slowing down, but people have not. People have only like sped up buying these types of appliances. But he like will tell me about how like, oh yeah, somebody just bought a $50,000 stove, and they'll never cook in it, or like a $90,000 Sub-Zero restaurant quality refrigerator, and they'll have like whole kitchens. He says that like nobody goes in. But because they entertain in their house, they want the best appliances to be in their kitchen. And it's just like in a kitchen that has like maybe $1 million worth of appliances, maybe less, but that nobody is using because they don't cook. But if their friend has a $50,000 range, they need one too. And you can't have beautiful paintings and couches and have a Kenmore refrigerator. So you need like these, like, appliances have become like these weird accessories that will never be used.
Oh, what a fucking, I'm glad your brother's working, first of all.
Yeah.
But what a fucking bummer. I mean, I know you're right. It's just so sad where it is like, I could just imagine like if I was a car person knowing that it's like, oh, there's, this rich person has this really cool old Chevy or something and they're never driving it.
Yeah.
But I know it would be such a fun car to drive. Why wouldn't you drive it? They just have it so they can like just collect it. Is such a bummer, because it is really like almost more than anything. I can even understand parking a car and never driving it and just admiring it more than I can understand like you're never going to turn on that awesome stove. You don't want to do a bunch of cool stuff with it. Is so sad. It's so sad.
It's one thing where I joke around of just like, the day that someone buys this stove, let me know, because I want to go like scream at them. But it is, I don't know if you've had to like you have tricks to your oven. Like I know my oven always needs more time than they prescribe. Like I don't know what it is about my oven, but like it just, I guess, doesn't work as well as everybody. Like if it says 15 minutes, I know I can leave it in 20 and it'll be fine, kind of thing. Like you learn the tricks of your shitty oven. Mm-hmm. Just thinking about like cooking in an oven or baking in an oven that has a type of convection and like conducting heat in a way that like a cake is perfectly made. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
It's just,
no, I know.
So like, yeah, like you said, like, God, like I feel like Jay Leno being like, God, I'd love to get behind that oven.
Yes, exactly. But it's true, and you should feel that way.
I'd love to go to Burbank and drive that oven.
Yeah. But these things are meant to be used. That's why it's like, oh man, when we move out of our place, it's going to be, our stove is going to be so grody. You know what I mean? It's like, we'll do what we can and we'll get it as clean as possible. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be like sparkling new anymore because we've used the shit out of it. And we don't have even a like, what is it called? A hood. Like we don't even have a hood above our oven. So and we cook a ton, and we like try to open windows, and we especially have to do that because the smoke alarm goes off so easily because it's a really small place. And so like when like there's just like, it's not a ton, it's not horrible, but there's like ceiling grease, you know what I mean? There's little, there's going to be a thin film of just like, there's just like ambient cooking, off
off-gassing, I guess, that's happening. And that's okay. Like, I kind of, on the one hand, it's like sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish we had a bigger this, or I wish we had more of that. But at the end of the day, it's like, we have a kitchen and we like to cook, so we use the shit out of it. Yeah. And on the one hand, I'm like, if people have kitchens, it's like, you don't go in there all the time, you don't cook, it doesn't make sense for you right now. I'm not trying to be like, again, like we were talking about being judgy of other people's anything.
Yeah, you
and
do
I
what you
really don't mean to be like, people who cook any less than we do, because we do a ton, I'm like judging them. That's not how I feel it. Obviously, no. Like that's the reason I ask, like, where does it fit in or not fit in your life? Because I think it's important to own for people that it's like, it might not fit in right now. It might never fit in, and that's okay. But I think it's the sort of like, what do you want to call it? It's just like any other sort of, when people get upset where it's like, oh, a person is Instagramming themselves doing blank thing that I know because I know them. They never do. They just want to be like, I'm the person that does this.
Gotcha.
I think that's how I feel about like, we got this $50,000 stove that we never use. That bums me out.
Well, yeah. And also it's just how much that like I cook and things like that. Thinking about like now when I look at other apartments, I'm like, where's the counter space? Where will I chop? And how much, like, that's the thing now I'm just kind of like, God, imagine cooking in a kitchen with a bunch of counter space. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the difference that would make.
Speaking as somebody who last night made like I was saying, I don't really bake, but I was just like, sort of took it upon myself to be like, I'll make a fun little late night dessert last night. And so it's like 12:30 in the morning and I'm trying to figure out how to make Toll House cookies. But because we've been like cooking all week and we've both been super busy, we haven't been able to do a ton of dishes and our kitchen is small, just going like, oh, I'm making chocolate chip cookies, a thing that I never make, with zero usable counter space. And I am perhaps dangerously making it work. Like that is like exactly what I know exactly what you mean, where it's just like the luxury of that is so appealing.
Yeah.
It does. Exactly. It changes the way you look at things, and it does change like what you value. I think in probably like when you guys in your next place, like it will change like what you value but it also a little bit be like, I don't know, it'll probably be a little bit sentimental too when it's like, you know, like you said, you know your oven now really well.
Yes.
And that kind of thing.
I mean, it is interesting. I think like every time I've moved out of an apartment, I like, when I look at new apartments, there's stuff I'm like, I didn't even think about to care about this thing until I was in a bad version of it kind of deal. But it is just like doing like mise en place with space to put that stuff somewhere. You know what I mean? Is just like, oh God.
You mean beside the windowsill?
Yeah, beside like just like shoving it out of the way and just like, and because when you get married, you get a bunch of like appliances. So like I'm days where I'm like, God, I wish like my KitchenAid mixer was more accessible, or I wish like we still haven't like gotten our rice cooker out because it's like, where am I going to put this kind of deal, you know? Something to look forward to.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, no, for sure. I think it's neat, and it's neat. It's like cooking as a life sport kind of a thing where you're like, oh yeah, we can do, this is now something that we know we know we like. And so that just gets to be something that I always get to do in some form. And that will kind of like grow and change. And it's really cool. And you'll probably be in some place with like a great stove and a great everything and a great oven and a little bit like, oh yeah, now this is just something where, oh shit, I burned this. Cause when in our last place, like I had to do this for 20 minutes and I forgot, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
it also would be probably the unfortunate world of like, maybe then working so much harder that I have less time to.
I know. I think about that all the time. Yeah. Where it's just sort of like, oh, okay. Yeah. We have like frustrations and things in our careers that we wish were more X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Or like right now where it's sort of like, yeah, we wish that like everybody else that the fucking pandemic wasn't happening so that we could do different things and we could do different stuff. But it is just sort of, and have more of a life and have the world not be so catastrophic, et cetera, for all of the reasons. But it's a little bit going like, well, at least one sort of like, not silver lining, but just sort of like something that you have to look to, I guess, or we have looked to and been grateful for is like, we just get to do this all the time. We get to do so much stuff that we probably wouldn't have time or inclination to do otherwise. And so we just have to.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that that's where like productivity is kicked up so much in the past 100 years, but we don't have more spare time. We've just like filled it with more productive things because of capitalism and how bad the world is. But it is like, we should have more time to cook. We should have more time to make these things, but we're all kind of cooking less because it feels like we have to whether we sit in traffic for an hour both ways or whatever, or because, we have to work more, we just have less time for everything.
Yeah, no, this is a whole other fucking
Which is
thing. But I
unfortunate.
read this book like last year that feels very relevant, or increasingly relevant to me by the day. That was basically like, it was this guy basically being like, okay, there's no God, there's no heaven, there's no afterlife, there's no whatever. So he was basically like, and he's asserting this. I'm not saying I necessarily believe that or don't believe that. In fact, it changes from day to day, depending on how depressed I am. But like, he was like, so therefore the only really valuable thing is like, not even just like time in your life or years in your life, but literally the amount of like free time that you have to do stuff of your own choosing, basically. He was like, that's it. That is like the actual valuable thing. And the sooner that we can like reorganize society around that, the better. Like, that's the only like just and real and fair like society. And in a weird way, I was reading it a little bit like, okay, this is like crazy and insane. And I'm just so feel trapped in everything that is the world right now that I'm like, that'll never happen. And then there's another part of me that's like, it's freaky to think about, like, in a weird way. And then there's another part of me that's like, am I reading this? And then like in 100 years, people are going to be like, oh yeah, that was the first book that ever figured anything out. You know what I mean? Like, it was such a weird,
I do think that like you have to like retrain your brain, because I think that because of like the Puritan work ethic and capitalism, that it's like you're only worth what labor you can create. But like, you have worth and you are valuable when you're not working, and you need to not be working. But I think we've been like trained also, because people are like, if people have a leisurely lifestyle, they'll just start looting. If they don't have something to do, they'll just start being destructive. When it's like, no, like, wealthy people don't do anything all day.
like the Southern Comfort guy.
Yeah, and he doesn't have any purpose, but you can create like valuable hobbies, and you can create like just like search for knowledge, and there's so many things you can do. But I think that's why in some ways this like quarantine has been difficult for me, because I have been so wired to be like, unless you are creating, you're wasting your time. When it's just like, well, that's not true. And the moments that you're learning German are worthwhile, even if you'll never speak German to anyone really. And the moments you're cooking a great meal are worthwhile because it makes you happy. But there's like trying to get over that guilt about like, but I haven't written a screenplay kind of thing. But it's like, okay.
Are you learning German?
I am learning German on Duolingo.
Cool. How's that going?
We don't know a lot of words, but so I can't say fine, but I know Kartoffel is potato. I really like languages, and I like do want to go to Germany, like, or Austria someday. And I think that like German is so interesting because it's so close to English, that so many times, like in like a Simpsons episode or other things, when they were speaking, I thought they were speaking with an affectation, but they were speaking German. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
Like to say like, das ist gut. Like, I just was like, oh, or like, ja, ja. Like, I thought like, ja was just like, oh, okay, that's just like the accent. But ja means yes. You know what I mean? Little moments like that have been very interesting. Of just like, wait, those were the words. It wasn't like
that's the language. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so cool. Has that like, has there been any crossover in terms of like, cause the thing that it made me think of was like, I got for a gift this like book that's like an Austrian cookbook that is in English, but then it's like all of the recipes are in both languages. And just like, has it opened up for you a sort of like, do you like that food? Is that something that you're interested in? Are you interested in that?
I did make a strudel because I was like, oh, and part even watching Inglourious Bastards, I was like, oh, that strudel looks really good.
It looks so good.
I was like, what is like even a strudel? So there has been some of that, and you do kind of learn even like some foods and things like that. But so I guess, a little bit, it has like opened up. And I think I like before we went to Paris on our honeymoon, and I like gave myself a couple months to learn French enough, which was fun. But also like, as soon as I opened up my mouth to say bonjour, they were like, oh, you don't speak the language. And I was like, you got that from Bonjour? Like, they would not speak any French to me. Like, immediately they were like, we're not playing this game. You speak English. Kind of deal. But I have always just like really enjoyed learning languages. And so that has been a fun little like quarantine thing. And also, I didn't take much Spanish in high school, but I surprised myself like going through the tests how much I had retained, which was fun to just be like, oh, I didn't totally forget this. But
yeah, I mean, it is, it's still in there. There is something satisfying about it. I would love to reactivate all of that, like high school. We had to take like middle school and high school, or we had to take Spanish in middle school and then could choose a language in high school. And I just kept going with Spanish, but I would love to reactivate it. But tell me about the strudel making process.
I was like looking into it, like, cause a lot of times if I want to make something, I'll read like multiple recipes to kind of be like, okay, what's the consensus on this? And a lot of places were like, it's very difficult to make the dough that you have to make for the strudel, because you have to make it like a very thin, like where you can see through dough that you then like,
wow.
I think the word is laminate, which is like the same kind of ish process as making croissants. And I read enough where enough people were like, don't do that. Like, you can try to do that, but unless you have like a German grandma who's like walking you through it, doing it, you're going to like hate yourself for doing this. So I got, I think phyllo dough, but you also could, I think there's a version, get like a puff pastry, but I got phyllo dough and just kind of like layered that with like butter in between. And then I, like, again, looking at different recipes, but I like chopped up Granny Smith apples, raisins, breadcrumbs, and I think like probably like butter and cinnamon and things like that. And then you just kind of like, you put a bunch of phyllo dough, and then you put the filling, and then you fold it in like over itself into like thirds, and then you cook it. So it wasn't that much work, but it was pretty good. And we had it with, I think sometimes I have the mistake of being like, if I'm going to make something, I'm going to make it top to bottom homemade. And then I'm like really stressed out by being like, why did I also decide to make homemade cream? Why did I also decide to, you know what I mean? So for this, I think got like either like an ice cream or a cream store-bought. Because I just wanted to, I was like, this phyllo dough is going to be enough. But it was very good and very satisfying to be like, oh, this is what it tastes like.
Oh, that rules. That's so cool. And also there's something about, I don't know, Europe and flaky, you know, the sort of like really thin, like flaky pastry for some reason, for whatever reason, everywhere in Europe at some point they were just like, oh yeah, this is the best. And also impossible to make, it sounds like, across cultures. I don't know how they ever made it before modern technology, but I think they were just like exactly what you said. They just had time. It just made sense.
My next pursuit will be to try to make croissants, but I think it's from one of the magazines I get has like taught how to do it, and it literally is a 3-day process.
Oh my gosh.
Like
that is like, yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it is one, and I knew that like a little bit, that like, oh, this is pretty hard to make kind of thing, but I didn't realize how much like they'll say like you don't need to like put this dough back in the oven, but like if it ferments this amount and things like that, and you have to like create like a butter square to like laminate the dough and everything like that, I think I'm going to get very frustrated, but it is like, if not now, when? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, that rules. I'm so excited to see how that goes. Well, we will be locked in on the Instagram story for the play-by-play.
If I make them, I'll bring some, I'll drop some off, because I won't need like 12.
Do. Absolutely. That's what I didn't want to leap to that.
No. But there are some stuff where it is like, you can only make them in batches, and it's like, they don't stay for very long, especially if you're making them at home kind of thing. But it's like, well, what am I going to do? Like, I like giving like Mono and Betsy, my old housemates, I dropped off like earlier in the quarantine, I made like sesame seed, like red bean. I don't even know. They have like a Korean name, but it's just like a donut kind of thing that you make with like the same kind of flour that like mochi is made with. But you only make them in batches, and I was like, I got to give some of these off. We can't eat 2 dozen of these.
Exactly. It's the process. The process was the gift you gave yourself, and then the thing is the gift that you are giving other people, except for the probably, hopefully, still large amount that you keep for yourself.
Yes. Plus, it's in some ways too. It's like if you make something, a tree falls in the forest and nobody gets to taste it, what's the point? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important thing to like realize. I don't know. It's just like you were saying earlier a little bit, where it's just like you have to, with like food and Instagram and like different, like valuing it in different ways. I think it's like, it is important to just like remind yourself that like, oh yeah, the reason I'm making this is so that like, A, it's fun to make, and then people can taste it, and that's like, and eat it and be like nourished or just like made happy by this thing. Like that's like part of
so much food is community, and so that it is sharing, and it is like giving to other people, whether that's your family or your neighbors and things like that. And so to just make it in a vacuum in some ways is like, well, I watched that movie, but nobody else did. So what's the point, you know, like, or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's, I don't know. I think that's really cool. Anytime that we have, well, Haley's done like 99% of it. In fact, 100% of it. I haven't done shit of like making things to like bring to other people, or then vice versa when people have brought stuff to us during this time. It rules. It's so neat and nice when you're just like desperate for any kind of just sort of like of that kind of contact is so cool.
Oh yeah.
But Mary Sasson, last thing, if there was anything in the world that you have eaten in your entire life, like be it something from when you were a kid that you remember from growing up, or something that you had in a restaurant once, or like traveling when you guys were on your honeymoon, if there is any dish that you have not made, don't know how to make, but you could just snap your fingers and know how to make perfectly, what would it be?
There was, this is going to sound like a weird, there was a chocolate Costco cake, or maybe it was a Sam's Club, it looked like the cake from Matilda that like my sister got for her birthday one year. And it was like, this is the best cake. And I think that like, I am always trying to like, to know the recipe for like just the best chocolate cake. I think to have that in my arsenal, I think would be so wonderful. Cause then you're the person who just pulls out always the best chocolate cake. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's like, oh, absolutely. Was it, I want to say, I'm trying to think if this is just like a different Costco chocolate cake, but I feel like we got one once, or maybe more than once growing up, where it was like multi-layered and had like, I feel like it had like chocolate, like shavings on the outside. Am I?
Too.
I'm sorry?
It was huge too, like this cake.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we're thinking of the same one, and it was so fucking good, and truly just a like, you're like, this is, especially as a kid, you're like, nothing could be better than this, because this is the most chocolate and the most cake it's possible for something to be.
I have a big pet peeve of mine is that like sweets are such like a treat that a bad sweet makes me so mad, because it's just like, what are we doing this for then? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
a bad treat.
Yeah, when I get like a bad cookie or like whatever I'm just kind of like, well then what were we here for? You know what I mean? Why did we waste all of this for? You know? So just like when you're already indulging yourself and like, you know that it's like, this is this many more calories I don't technically need to just indulge in something where like, that was 100% worth it. And that satisfied me in a way that like, I don't need any more cake. That satisfied me. And that cake really was. I'm
hard pressed to, I think that would be such a high yield thing to invest in learning. Like, you'll never regret being like, I figured out, I've targeted my perfect chocolate cake recipe / process.
Yeah. Especially because it's only going to come out in like ceremonial big moments. And I think
yes, you're right. It's going to be very spotlit.
And it's going to show stop. Yeah. And again, looping back around to how I believe the world works. I am running this show. You can get in the way or you cannot, but
And the smart teacher will just say, okay, it's time for Mary's
Yeah, it's someone else's birthday, but everyone else knows I'm bringing out the best cake. Give her moment.
These Sassons and their chocolate cake, they're back again. And there's 2 more coming right behind.
Coming back to that moment, realizing it, it's just like, oh my God, I got to go think about why I do that.
Well, you got plenty of time.
Yeah.
Mary Sasson, thank you for joining me. This was a hoot.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that is it. That is all for this week's episode of Stay for Dinner. Thank you so much to my guest, Mary Sasson. You can find her on Twitter and Instagram at Mary Sasson, Sasson. If you haven't done so already, please rate and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps more people find the show, and that in turn helps there be more show. My interstitial music is by Advanced Bass, the amazing Owen Ashworth. My title song is July 4th, 2004 by Jason Anderson. My podcast art is by Sarah Beacon, that is Becan. I wrote a couple of novels, The Boy Who Couldn't Sleep and Never Had to, and Crap Kingdom. They are available wherever fine books are sold. Support your local independent bookstore, or a website that I'm liking right now for books is bookshop.org. You can shop online, and then they will they put some money into a fund that supports local bookstores. So do that if you are shopping online right now. It's not an ad. It's just a thing that I am liking at this moment. Again, would that it were an ad. That's it. That's all for now. Talk to you next week. Bye.